Welcome to the MEND, a podcast about services and support for victims and survivors of crime, sponsored by the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I'm Anna Nasset, and I am your host of this bi-monthly podcast and show. Today on the show, I'm delighted to have back Karen Tronsgard-Scott from the Vermont Network of Domestic and Sexual Violence. Karen's here today to talk about Uplift Vermont, a campaign for a violence-free Vermont. And I'm so excited to have you here to talk about this amazing, amazing campaign that's been so many years in the making. It's really great.
I'm always so glad to be in a room with you, and talking to you is one of my very favorite things in the world. So thank you so much for having me back.
Back at you, my friend. So as we get started, I always want to let everyone know that this show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime, and how we can look towards a future that has no victims and survivors of crime as we look to ways to eradicate. We always want to acknowledge our healing process and provide resources, not only in our state of Vermont, but throughout the country. And I think today's show is an amazing one for other people in other states to be listening to and looking at how they can take these concepts into their own state. Because Vermonters, we're leaders in a lot of ways. And I also always want to begin with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place where we can discuss topics, but within that, we may occasionally have some sensitive subject matter. So I always urge people to listen at their own discretion. Today, as I said, I'm so excited to have Karen Tronsgard-Scott here again from the network, the Vermont Network for Domestic and Sexual Violence, which we'll just refer to as the network. Karen is the executive director of the network, which is Vermont's federally recognized coalition of organizations seeking to end violence against women. She is a nationally recognized speaker on issues related to domestic and sexual violence and on nonprofit leadership. Karen began her career in advocacy and nonprofit leadership in the 80s as a volunteer at a school for children with developmental disabilities in Colombia, Sri Lanka. She was the executive director of a domestic and sexual violence service organization in southeastern Ohio, a fellow Ohioan, for 13 years prior to coming to Vermont to lead the Vermont Network. Thank you so much for being here today, Karen.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here.
So as we get started, we're going to start this off a little bit differently because Karen's here to talk about Uplift Vermont, which, as I said, is a campaign for violent-free Vermont. And before we looked at how we want to discuss this, I think it's really important that we share some of the facts and data about our state of Vermont that have really pushed forward this concept of creating this campaign. So I'm going to share with everyone some of these stats, and then Karen's going to start speaking for us. So here in Vermont, how we care for each other matters. We treasure our state as a safe place, but Vermont is not safe for everyone. Thousands of Vermonters experience domestic and sexual violence each year. Together, we can prevent this before it starts, until every last Vermonter lives a life free from violence. Every day, all across Vermont, people experience domestic and sexual violence. Research indicates that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. 19,000 hotline calls were made by Vermonters seeking support and resources due to domestic or sexual violence in 2019. 9,000 people sought out in-person help in 2019. And for the past 25 years, half of all homicides in Vermont have been related to domestic violence. In some years, Vermont has ranked in the top 10 states in the nation for our rate of domestic violent homicide. These are some pretty staggering facts. They really hit me in the gut as I sit here in my cozy home where we all think we're so safe here in our precious state. And the reality is that many of our friends and neighbors are not safe. So thank you for putting together those facts and really pulling on them to start this campaign. So I'd love to just have you start by sharing what the Uplift campaign is how it was started, how you've been working towards this, and how it was put into place.
Thank you so much, Anna. It is a kick, you know, the number of people, our friends, our family members, our neighbors that are experiencing domestic and sexual violence is just not really acceptable in our state where, for so many reasons, we're so safe. And, you know, the network's been around since, gosh, 1986, working on this issue. And for most of that time, we really presented a lot of that data. And we also presented like a viewpoint that this was a problem that was impacting a smaller group of people in our state, and was the responsibility of a small group of people in our state to handle, to respond to talk about. But what we found out is that there are many Vermonters who are really concerned about this issue and want to know what to do. They want to know how they can help. And so that was the genesis of Uplift Vermont. We started hearing from folks who, you know, they just kept asking the question, how can we help with this? What can we do? How can we be a part of this? And so Uplift Vermont is a campaign to change how we think about and talk about and respond to gender-based violence, which is another. Gender-based violence is one of the ways we talk about domestic and sexual violence that recognizes both of those issues, as well as the continuum of people who experience domestic and sexual violence, which includes people identify as women, people identify as men, and people identify outside the gender binary. And so what we've done for this multi-year campaign is we've taken the voices of survivors and we've combined them with the most up-to-date technology about how we change the thinking about things in society. So survivors are telling us things all the time, and Vermonters are telling us things all the time. And we want to use this great modern technology we have to bring those to the voices and the people that want to talk about this issue together. This is a community-based prevention campaign, and we know that violence is really far too prevalent in our state, but we also know that there's active ways for us to prevent violence. And the key there is preventing violence together. So we're working with communities, we're working with folks who are, you know, just regular old citizens in the small towns of our state, to give them information and the skills and tools that they need to be able to talk about gender-based violence in their communities. By engaging in conversations, then we can raise awareness, and we can think about solutions to this issue that are focused in community, through collaboration with the people that live in communities and survivors. They're one and the same.
Awesome.
You've said this, our long-term goal is ending domestic and sexual violence in our communities.
Awesome. Can you, for our listeners, talk a little bit about prevention and what you're doing with prevention versus response, which,
right,
you know, for you and I, we know that, like, you know, it was so focused on response for so long, and now we're trying to look more at prevention. And if you could just talk a little bit more about how you're approaching that.
Sure. You know, in Vermont, we are really blessed. We're so lucky to have these, there's 15 plus organizations that provide intervention for people who have experienced domestic and sexual violence. And then there's another 14 organizations that are working with people who cause harm in their intimate partner relationships. So those are all interventions. These are interventions. There's action that happens after domestic violence has happened. And we know that by the time somebody comes forward to call the police or to seek help through a shelter program, like, you know, programs like the Clarina Howard Nichols Center, Steps to End Domestic Violence, Circle, Mosaic Vermont, and all the others, we know that there's already been a lot that's happened inside that relationship, a lot of coercion, a lot of violence, and a lot of harm has already been caused. So these organizations are uniquely skilled at offering intervention services to help people develop safety plans, to figure out how to change conditions on and the lives of people who experience violence, as well as how to help people who cause harm to make different choices. Prevention happens, I could get really technical, but I won't. Prevention happens essentially within the context of violence already occurring or before violence occurring. And Uplift is really focused on before violence occurs. So we know that domestic and sexual violence has a relationship to structures in our society that are about oppression. The oppression of women, the oppression of children, the oppression of people of color, the oppression of indigenous people. These are all roots that are entwined. And what Uplift Vermont seeks to do is to have conversations about what's feeding violence in our communities. And it's violence eats up a lot. It's got a healthy appetite. And so what's feeding the violence in our communities, and how can we cut off that pipeline? So when I think about this, I think about things like, we do a lot of work on campuses, both the Vermont Network and our member organizations. We do a lot of work on campuses. And I'm just going to speak as honestly as possible about this through my own experiences of engaging with some members of the Greek community, not all members of the Greek community, but some members of the Greek community on our campuses have a relationship to women that's really toxic, right? I've seen the headlines around this. And it's one thing for me, a 60-year-old, woman, to say, don't do that, young men. But what Uplift offers us is a way for the majority of the members of the Greek community on campus who are not violent, who do not degrade women. It offers them the opportunity to learn how to talk to their peers, to interrupt that worldview. Mm-hmm. Young women are actually less value than their purposes to have sex with them, things like that. So that's a pretty stark example. In most of our communities, there's, I could give lots of other examples, but Uplift is really trying to interrupt the cultural conditions that support violence in intimate partner relationships.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I know I feel like, because I speak with the military a lot, and recently got to go to, and actually spoke in person in Oklahoma to basic trainees, and, watching, these young people who had just joined the military and are coming from, a lot of times that was their escape from whatever their home life was, whatever it might be. That was the only answer. And to get to go in and talk to them at that point. Now they're probably going to listen to the other veterans that I had with me more than they will me.
Sure.
But that concept, of giving them the tools at this age, when they're coming out of whatever situation they are into this new situation, can maybe create change. And you and I might not get to see it in our lifetime. Probably won't. I might, but and that was one of the questions I had for you. And it was kind of more towards the end, but like, how does it feel? I mean, you've done this work for so long and it's really shifted over the years. Yeah. How does it feel, especially with a campaign like this? I mean, it's this legacy you're leaving to the state. And with all this work, like, to do the work that we might not see the results.
Yeah. Well, it's been such a great privilege for me to do this work for 27 years and to work with and learn from survivors, from people who cause harm, from people that I've had the chance to work with, from leaders across our state. I mean, it's been pretty amazing. And I've never had so much hope as I do today. I'm so excited about this campaign. I'm so excited about the possibilities of it, because I think what it does is it actually gives us a pathway to demystify this issue, to talk about our own experiences with oppression, to step into actively engaging in the actions that are needed to interrupt violence, gender-based violence. And there's, a lot of this has to do with, I'm just going to say it, white supremacy culture. And so there's a relationship between uprooting the causes of violence and uprooting uprooting racism. And you could make an argument, and many scholars have made this argument, that one of the strongest roots that feeds violence in our families is this relationship to racism and this relationship to oppression, and how it manifests itself in the actions of individual people. I could go really, kind of philosophical here, but I won't. I mean, it's not that interesting probably for the average listener. But the thing is that I'm really convinced that what Uplift is doing is creating a relationship with the future that's generative and makes things possible, because nothing is possible when we're working individually, when we're working in isolation. And for far too long, our movement has had this standard around safety that required us to hold things in secret, that in a standard in which we felt like we were the experts and nobody else could get it right, so we couldn't really collaborate well with others, including people who cause harm.
Yep.
And a relationship with it, which I think is generalized across society, that accountability means punishment, even though we know that it doesn't work. It doesn't change people's behavior. So Uplift is this incredible campaign fed by the voices of survivors, engaging people in communities, just anybody who wants to engage, in a way that mirrors the world we're trying to build, where the Uplift embodies this future world that we're hoping for. I think, again, I don't want to get too much into the headspace, but I actually think that we're starting into this incredible worldwide transformation. And there's a lot of us out there that think this. The old ways are dying off. The old structures, we can see them crumbling before our very eyes. And we have to ask ourselves, what's next? And Uplift is a pathway to what's next. Uplift is a pathway to communities where, when somebody is traumatized, we recognize the trauma at an early age and we start working with them so that they are never in a position of choosing violence. We're investing in peace. We're refusing to accept that violence is inevitable. We refuse to accept it. So I'm just so excited about this.
Got chills.
Well, and I'm excited about this because I'm a spectator. The people that are doing this are the people out there in the communities, and I've been so heartened. When we did a soft launch in November, with our closest co-collaborators and co-conspirators and allies. And their excitement was it was palpable. And since then, so many people have come to us and said, I want to be involved in this. How do I do this? And because we need actually everybody.
Yeah.
We need everybody. This is, the thing about Uplift is it helps us discover all the people that want to do this work, regardless of their gender identity, regardless of, where they live, because we need 100% of everybody who wants to do this with us.
Yeah.
We can only work together.
Absolutely. So how does that look? I mean, how do we become involved? And, I'm in the Mad River Valley, wherever we are in this state, how do we get involved to work with this campaign, to work with our communities? Yeah.
The best way to get there is to go to our website, which is www.vtnetwork.org. And on the website, you can enter this in a couple different ways. You'll see a link to the Uplift campaign, but also the person who's spearheading this effort inside the network is our Director of Policy and Community Organizing, Jessica Barquist. And so if you look at our staff list, you can find her contact information. And what we're trying to do is to find the people in communities who want to do this work and then bring them together to engage in dialogue and learn some things and learn how to go back out into communities and talk to their friends and neighbors and coworkers about this issue.
Yeah. And we want to be clear, this is a long-term campaign. This isn't, I think probably some people will be like, oh, sure, okay, I could do that for a little bit. Like, this is a long-term campain. It's not a year. Right. I mean, it was years in the making. And I think that's, we don't normally think about campaigns that way. It's like, there's a start, there's an end date. Like I mean, I don't know. Is there an end date to this? No.
Well,
I mean, kind of.
So what we're imagining into is 5-year increments. And when we first outlined a 5-year increment, it was pre-COVID. So we know that, we've had to, as everybody else has, we've had to pivot a lot of things in relationship to to COVID, we very purposefully are not funding this effort through federal funds because federal funds are chunked out in 1-year increments. And we know that we, 5 years and beyond is what we're looking at. I mean, and the reality is if we do this well enough, and I'm talking about we, all of us, do this well enough, it's not even, it becomes the way we are.
Yep.
Not a campaign. It is the way we are going.
Absolutely.
Now, 5 years from now, there's a couple things that are happening. In March, the beginning of March, we're releasing our economic report on the cost of violence in our state. I won't give you any teasers, but the numbers are staggering. That's all
sure.
I'll say about it. And then, we have some legislative things to do. And we're so blessed. Again, we're so lucky in this state. I mean, you and I are not from Vermont, but how lucky we landed here, because so much is possible, right?
Truly, yeah.
Our legislators, 100% of them are so well informed about these issues. They really get it. I feel like I listen to my peers in other states and hear about their battles, and we're not faced with any of that because our legislators are really looking out for the most vulnerable and marginalized Vermonters, and we want to continue to encourage them to do that. But we haven't spent a lot of time talking about prevention to our legislators. So that's one of the things we really want to do in the coming years is to build their knowledge and understanding how prevention, especially that prevention before the first act, can happen and how they can support it. And then there's always technical things for us to take a look at in the legislature. We are really involved right now in advocating for funding for a response to folks who cause harm in their intimate partner relationships through our state's domestic violence accountability programs. And we are very interested in working to end the statutory prohibition on using restorative justice in situations involving domestic violence victims. So that's something we're working hard on right now. And I think that it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. And so everything that we do to support marginalized Vermonters, everything that we do to recognize the impact of poverty on Vermonters, everything we do to recognize the differential impact and the outsized impact of COVID on Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Vermont, all of those things will help.
Yes, it's all connected.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that's so important that, some of our listeners might not realize, and you've mentioned this many times, is working with the people who caused harm as well, and looking at different ways to bring everyone in. And you shared a story with me years ago that really I think at the time I was new to this field, and so I walked away and it still rings with me. And it was you talking about these potluck dinners that you did. I think it was in maybe Texas. Is this ringing a bell with you?
No, that's not surprising though.
You were talking about bringing people together who you recognize how much domestic violence was in this community, and that these people all love to share food. And so I think it was that you would bring them together for potlucks, families, where there were people
it was actually, I'm with you now. It was a story. It's actually not me who did this. It was a brilliant leader named Julio Perillo, who was working in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
At a community center. And it was life-changing hearing about this, hearing that her presentation was life-changing for me, because I had been raised in the movement to believe that it was vitally important for us to separate people who are causing harm in their relationships from the people they were harming. It was a matter of life and death, despite knowing that most of those people were still together. They're together, they're trying to navigate this phenomenon in their relationship. And I don't want to diminish the harm that people can cause people. I've known people who were killed by their intimate partners. It's a very serious and dangerous situation. More than 50% of the homicides in the state are related to domestic violence. But I think we have to understand that people who cause harm in relationships they're people. They're people. And they have all the things that have happened to them cumulatively across their life, their lifetime, as well as their historical relationship to trauma, have they're people who love other people. They're people who are parents. They're people who have jobs. They're people. And from, I speak from my own experience, I spent a lot of time thinking about how to punish those people because it felt good to me, right? There was no relationship to around outcomes. Were people safer if somebody went to prison? There's no evidence of that. Are they safer if they're punished by some other means? There's just no evidence of it. If you talk to people who work with people who cause harm, and there's a brilliant woman in our state named Melissa Dees, who works with people who cause harm. And Melissa always says, you have to find a way into their hearts. We have to make the connection. And once that connection's made, then it is really possible to change things. So this idea that, we've said, hold batterers accountable, hold rapists accountable for many, many years. And again, I am not saying that the harm isn't real. I'm not saying that the harm isn't devastating. I'm not saying that these are not uniformly homicidal people, but there are some homicidal people, some very dangerous people in this grouping. But for those that we can reach into their hearts, why are we not doing that?
Yeah.
Why are we not doing that? I will tell you, when I first started doing this work way back in 1995, my organization in Ohio, the organization I worked with, at that time we called them batterers, people who cause harm, as well as survivors. And I went as the new ED, I went to observe this group. And what struck me was that, they were all white, heterosexual men. I'm sorry, heterosexual cisgendered men. And what struck me about these guys was that they knew it. They knew what they were doing was wrong, right? Wrong for their partner, wrong for their kids, wrong for their pets, wrong for society, wrong for them. But they did not have a way out of it. And so all of the actions, and the only option was the only thing that was going on was you get arrested and you get referred to this group.
Yeah.
Nothing else. So a lot of their energy was devoted to how do I keep myself from going back to jail? Rather than how do I show up in this group in a state of, vulnerability and in community with these other people that struggle with the same issues, and how can we work together move forward together. So I think there's really there's compelling evidence about this. Lee Goodmark from the University of Maryland has written extensively about this. She's also affiliated with the law school here in Vermont. She's written extensively about this stuff. I think we have to be realistic and understand that the tools that we've been using to prevent people from causing harm have not been that effective.
Right. So does this campaign, do you think it will help develop new tools?
I think it will, because really, in Vermont, the opportunity we have is that we're small communities where everybody knows everybody else, and so if we give folks the opportunity to talk about this issue in ways that uplift the stories of hope and resilience, regardless of where you experience, your experience, but uplift the stories of hope and resilience and help people have the tools to address the challenges they face in their life through nonviolent means. I think we can really change things.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you mark the success of this campaign? Is it just like with all the numbers going down, or what would for you feel like the success be?
It's such a great question. People who know me who are listening are laughing right now because they know I have this very difficult relationship to evaluation, formal evaluation. And there's lots of data that we can take a look at, and we will take a look at, including the number of domestic violence related homicides, which really was part of the genesis of this project. It's like, how do we address this? Why every year it's the same, 51, 52%, 60%. And, in the really worst years, 90% of the homicides in our state are related to domestic violence. So for me, that's a big number. Eliminating the relationship between homicide and domestic violence. And I'm reflecting on this very complex issue in a very simplistic way. So I just want to recognize that.
Yeah.
For me, the success of this project sits with the moment that the young man turns away from violence. Even one is good. The moment that somebody notices a child struggling and recognizes that there's trauma, and that there and intervenes, not in a way that's punitive, but intervenes in a way that's supportive. I'm just gonna tell this story, because it's the truth. But I grew up in a violent home. My mother was violent with me, very violent with me. And when I was in 6th grade, Mrs. Ray Peck, my 6th grade teacher, noticed that something was wrong. And she nurtured me. She never said a word. She nurtured me that whole year, and I was acting out. Wow, I was wild. And she was her support, her attention, her quiet recognition that I wasn't even aware of until I was older, changed my life. So if that happens to one Vermont kid, we succeeded.
Absolutely. That's my Professor Knapp in college. Similar,
Yeah.
like after I was sexually assaulted, and just I was chaotic. Everything was just like, I was just out of my mind at the time. And this one professor, Jason Knapp, love him, just noticed, and really quietly just kind of let me do the work. And absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm here today because of him. And even when I completely had my break, like, he just really, is somebody that saw me through.
Yeah.
And it's so important to that.
So loving. So
yeah, and that it's the teachers, it's the neighbors, it's it's the acquaintances, it's everyone in our lives can really come together to make a difference when it comes to gender-based violence.
Right. Well, the reality is, we're all connected. We're all connected regardless of, what's happened to us, regardless of what we've done. We're all connected. And if we can strengthen those connections, I think there's great promise. Part of the situation that we're in right now in our world, this is me expressing an opinion, part of the situation, part of the thing that's really hard about our society today is the separation. We're separated from each other, and we've seen in the past year how divisive that separation can be, and it's harming all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we have time to talk about Askable Adults, but you reminded me of that.
Yes, please do. We'll kind of wind up with that, and so tell me about the Askable Adult campaign.
The Askable Adults campaign is something that's happening right now. We started doing this work about 3 years ago when we surveyed kids and youth in our state and asked them what they needed. What are they worried about? What do you need? And the overwhelming response was, we need to be able to talk to adults about the things that are present for us. We need to, what's happening to us, what we're worried about, the things that are hard or challenges. And so we need adults who actually know how to do that with us. And so that's how the Askable Adults campaign it really just bloomed out of that. And so this is a campaign where we teach adults how to become askable, how to engage with kids in trusting and fortifying relationships like your professor and my teacher did with us. And so again, it's on the website, www.vtnetwork.org. There's a curriculum, there's all kinds of materials, and the National Resource Center on Sexual Violence just today recorded their podcast around Askable Adults. So it's something that's it's blossoming across the country now. But the folks from our state, Amy Torsha, Chani Waterhouse, and Rebecca Gurney appeared on that podcast today to talk in depth about Askable Adults. But if anybody's interested, just a brief view at our website will give you everything you need.
Awesome. This has been amazing. Please go to Vermont Network or vtnetwork.org to learn about Uplift, to learn about Askable Adults. Yeah, just incredible. I did a podcast last year with Altruistic, formerly Green Dot, about prevention with one of my dearest friends, Leah Heggie. So if you want to learn some more about prevention, please go back and look at that one. And yeah, for everyone outside of Vermont, please go to vtnetwork.org and learn about how you can start to bring these things into place in your community and state. And I'm very excited to be part of the campaign. And yeah, anything you'd like to say as we close up?
You know, I love the way you always structure this, like the last word. This is my message. Anything and everything is possible if we choose each other.
Yes, love it. Thank you. I choose Vermont. You choose Vermont. We choose all the people here. And yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you as always, Karen. It's a delight to have you here. This is Karen Tronsgard-Scott from the VT Network, talking about the Uplift campaign to end gender-based violence here in Vermont. For more, go to vtnetwork.org. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, Anna@standupresources.com. Thank you so much and be well till next time.